The night my stepmother called, drunk and laughing, saying she'd burned all of my late mother's things, I froze. She sent me pictures of ashes with laughing emojis. I told my dad. 15 minutes later, he was being airlifted to the ICU for a heart attack. Last week, Stephanie Conway was served divorce papers and escorted out by deputies for destruction of sentimental property and emotional endangerment. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Stephanie had moved in 6 months after Mom's funeral, all smiles and casseroles. I wanted to believe she cared, but I caught her going through Mom's jewelry alone in the attic. When I asked why, she snapped, "You wouldn't understand." Dad brushed it off. Grief, he said. But something twisted in her eyes that day. I told Tara, my cousin, who just frowned and said, "Watch her." I started writing everything down. 3 weeks later, Stephanie hosted a dinner, Dad's favorite meal. Candlelit, almost romantic. She wore Mom's old scarf. I nearly lost it. I pulled her aside and asked her to take it off. She smirked and said, "Why?" "He seems to like it." I stormed out. Dad later apologized for her, blaming wine and loneliness. But my stomach churned. That wasn't grief, it was something else, something cruel. I bought a voice recorder that night. Dad's will disappeared from his safe. Stephanie claimed he'd moved it. I didn't buy it. Tara helped me search the house when they were out. We found nothing. Stephanie later said, "Funny how things vanish when you don't appreciate them." That night, I emailed Dad's lawyer. The subplot deepened when I overheard Stephanie whispering about changing things before it's too late. I couldn't sleep. Was she planning to take everything? Or worse, Stephanie began isolating Dad, changing his phone passcode, redirecting his mail. I asked if he'd noticed. He just looked tired. "She's helping," he said. Tara called it elder abuse. I recorded Stephanie yelling when she thought no one was around, things about shutting Riley up and getting what's mine. I forwarded the file to Dad's lawyer anonymously. Meanwhile, Dad's health declined. The subplot grew desperate. He needed protection, and I needed proof. Was I already too late? I scheduled a wellness check behind Stephanie's back. When the officer came, she played the grieving wife flawlessly. Dad barely spoke. The cop left unconvinced, but did nothing. Tara warned, "She's smart. You need more." The subplot cracked wider when I found Dad crying in the garage, staring at Mom's photo. He whispered, "She scares me sometimes." My heart clenched. I emailed the recordings again, this time with timestamps, but still no legal action. Stephanie accidentally locked Dad outside during a storm. He slipped on the porch, sprained his wrist. She laughed it off. "He's clumsy." But I saw her smug glance. I begged Dad to leave her. He shook his head. "Too tired," he said. I called Adult Protective Services. The subplot deepened again. Dad's bank showed recent withdrawals he didn't remember. Tara warned, she'd straining him. I started collecting everything: bank records, voice notes, photos. I was building a case. I sent my full report to a family lawyer. She said it was compelling but warned, "You'll need more than suspicion." The subplot grew urgent. Dad was missing appointments, confused more often. Stephanie blamed age. I watched her accidentally give him twice his medication dose. Tara caught it on video. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just jealousy, it was calculated, dangerous. I filed for emergency guardianship. The countdown had begun. She wouldn't go quietly. The courtroom smelled like old wood and tension. Stephanie sat across from me, dressed like a grieving widow. Crocodile tears ready. I handed the judge a folder: recordings, bank slips, photos. She watched me, jaw tight. Dad wasn't present. He was in the hospital after another accident. My voice trembled as I testified. Tara squeezed my hand. The judge didn't smile. "We'll reconvene after review." I'd drawn blood, but the war wasn't over. Stephanie launched a countersuit: defamation, emotional distress. Her lawyer painted me as bitter, attention-seeking. The courtroom murmured. I clenched my fists. Tara stood, presenting the video of the overdose. Gasps echoed. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Why wasn't this submitted earlier?" Tara answered, "It's new." Stephanie turned pale. I looked her dead in the eye. No more hiding. Dad's voice cracked in the video. "She's hurting me." The silence that followed felt like justice brewing. The judge called for a break. Outside, Stephanie hissed, "You'll regret this." I stepped closer, voice low, "You already do." Tara caught the exchange on video. Stephanie shoved past me, nearly knocking over an elderly woman. Reporters caught it all. The subplot turned public: news stations outside. Hashtags forming. Dad's lawyer smiled grimly. "You gave her rope. She's hanging herself." My chest ached, but I stood tall. The storm had begun. I wouldn't back down now. Stephanie submitted a forged note, Dad supposedly declaring her sole heir, but the handwriting was sloppy. Tara compared it to birthday cards Dad wrote me. The judge called in a handwriting expert. Tension cracked through the room. Stephanie's face twitched. I held my breath. "Preliminary analysis suggests forgery," the expert announced. The subplot turned explosive. Dad had begun recovery and asked for me. My heart nearly burst. It was working. We were breaking through her lies. On the final day, Dad appeared frail but alert. Gasps filled the courtroom. He testified, voice shaky but firm. "She isolated me, took things, said Riley didn't care." Stephanie stood abruptly, yelling, "He's confused. He's lying." The judge banged the gavel. Enough. The room spun. Tara gripped my shoulder. The subplot was no longer hidden. Dad cried as he looked at me. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you." I nodded, tears streaming. We weren't done yet. The morning after the verdict was delayed, I woke to find my car vandalized, spray paint scrawled "liar" across the side. Tara checked the security footage of Stephanie, hood up, middle of the night. The police opened a new file. The subplot boiled: Dad's insurance had been altered weeks before his heart attack. Beneficiary Stephanie. I brought it to the lawyer. "She wanted him gone," I said. He nodded grimly. The court hadn't ruled yet, but this wasn't over. Stephanie disappeared for 3 days. When she resurfaced, she had a black eye and claimed I'd assaulted her. Cops came to my door. I showed them timestamps, phone records, Tara's alibi. They backed off. The subplot cracked wider. Dad's neighbor handed over mail Stephanie had intercepted for weeks, including medical bills and lawyer letters. I handed it all over. "She's spiraling." Tara whispered, but spiraling people are dangerous. I tightened security at Dad's house that night. An anonymous tip reached my lawyer. Stephanie had withdrawn $5,000 from a joint account days before Mom died. The date burned I dug deeper. Hospital staff remembered Stephanie arguing with Mom's nurse about dosages. It wasn't proof, but the pattern screamed. The subplot snapped into focus. Had she been plotting longer than we knew? I brought it to the DA. If this connects, he warned. We're talking attempted manslaughter. My hands shook, so did Tara's. Stephanie tried to contact me, an email titled "Let's Talk." I didn't open it, sent it to my lawyer instead. He read it aloud. "I'll make it worth your while, walk away." Attached was a photo of me at 15 crying at Mom's funeral. I clenched my jaw. Manipulation always, Tara said. She's desperate. The subplot turned raw. Stephanie once tried to enroll me in therapy. Citing anger issues, she'd been rewriting my story for years. No more. At Dad's follow-up hearing, Stephanie didn't show. Her lawyer claimed emotional fatigue, but the judge issued a bench warrant. 2 days later, she was caught at the airport with a fake ID and $15,000 in cash. Tara stared at the news alert, mouth open. The subplot imploded. Inside her luggage were copies of Dad's medical files and blank prescription pads. She was running, I whispered, and taking everything with her. This wasn't just family drama. The buy got involved. Cross-state identity fraud triggered federal attention. Stephanie's past cracked open. A sealed record, previous name, 2 restraining orders from ex-husbands. The subplot turned national news headlines. Ran with Black Widow stepmother. I watched from Dad's hospital room, his hand in mine. She fooled us all, he whispered. Not anymore, I said. Tara forwarded more evidence to the feds. Her crimes weren't just ours to bear now. The storm had become a reckoning. The night my stepmother called, drunk and laughing, saying she'd burned all of my late mother's things, I froze. She sent pictures of the ashes with laughing emojis. I screamed. My dad clutched his chest. Minutes later, paramedics arrived. That was last month. Today, Stephanie Conway was escorted out by deputies, divorce papers in hand, for emotional endangerment and destruction of sentimental property. Stephanie moved in barely 2 months after my mom's funeral. She redecorated everything, painted over Mom's mural, boxed her journals, called them clutter. I bit my tongue. Dad said she was just helping, but when I saw her throw out Mom's wedding dress with the trash, my throat closed. Dennis, still broken, nodded at her choices. I stood there, paralyzed, realizing no one else was seeing what I saw. A week later, I found Stephanie in the attic, holding Mom's old journals. She didn't notice me at first. She was reading and laughing, mocking the pages aloud. She really thought she was special. She said. I snatched them from her hands as she shrugged. Just paper. Dad walked in. She kissed his cheek sweetly, and he smiled. I stood frozen, clutching the journals like lifelines, wondering how long she'd been reading. Stephanie started locking the guest bedroom, my old room. One night, I picked the lock and found Mom's photos torn, her jewelry missing. My hands shook. When I confronted Stephanie, she smirked. You're paranoid, Riley. Dad walked in halfway. She cried, claimed I screamed at her. He believed her. I looked at his hollow eyes and realized her grip on him was more than emotional. I wasn't just grieving, I was fighting. Dennis collapsed one afternoon. Stephanie claimed he's skipped medication, but his pillbox was untouched. 4 days worth. I called the doctor. They'd called her, but she said he didn't need them. My voice shook as I asked her why. He's forgetful, she said. No remorse. I told Dad. He looked at her, uncertain, then nodded at me. For a moment, I felt a crack in her control. That moment didn't last. Stephanie began rearranging legal files, estate documents, my mother's will. I caught her at Dad's desk with a shredder humming. Just junk, she said, holding the folder. I grabbed it. Inside was my mom's handwritten letter, naming me as executor. My fingers curled tight. Get out of my space, she hissed. Dad called from the hall, and her voice flipped sweet soft. I held the folder behind my back and walked away silently. I visited Dad's lawyer. He frowned when I showed him the letter. This isn't what I have on file, he said. Stephanie had filed a new version naming herself. My chest tightened. He agreed to review the signature. That night, Stephanie said, "Your dad's getting worse. Might be time for a conservatorship." My hands clenched. She was planning something legal, permanent. I couldn't let that happen. But no one else saw it. I burst into Dad's room with the original will and lawyer's confirmation in hand. She forged it, I said as Stephanie walked in behind me, calm. You forged it, Riley, she said. Dad stared at both of us. Pale enough, he whispered, but she stepped closer to him, brushing his arm. She's trying to take everything. I looked at Dad's trembling hands and knew he didn't know who to believe anymore. Stephanie whispered poison every chance she got. She wants your money, she told Dad. She never visits unless she wants something. I overheard it all. I slammed the bedroom door open. You're sick, I shouted. She cried instantly. She's scaring me. Dad looked torn. He raised his hand enough, but the damage was done. I saw it in his eyes. Doubt had sunk in, and I had no idea how to pull him back. The lawyer called a signatures fake. I'll prepare a motion. Relief hit me until I returned home. Stephanie stood in the living room with packed bags. Your father signed over power of attorney to me. My chest dropped. I ran to him. Is this true? He nodded slowly. She said you're unstable, Riley. I staggered back. She grinned behind him. That's when I knew this wasn't just manipulation. This was war, and I was losing. That night, I sat in my car outside the house shaking. My mother's journals were beside me. Pages crumpled from my grip. I called Tara, my mom's old friend. She isolated him, I said. He's signing things he doesn't understand. Tara paused, then said, we'll get help. I know a judge. I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Hope. I wasn't alone anymore. The fight wasn't over. And this time, I had backup. Tara connected me to Judge Morales, a family friend. We met at his chambers with the forged documents. We'll need a capacity evaluation, he said. I filed immediately. Stephanie found out fast. You'll regret this, she hissed. The next morning, Dad was missing. Stephanie said he went for a walk, but he'd left without his phone, shoes, or wallet. I called the police. That day, I stopped hoping she'd slip. I started proving it. They found him 2 towns over, confused, dehydrated, wandering. He didn't remember leaving. At the hospital, Stephanie showed up yelling, "She's poisoning him." Security escorted her out. I stayed by his bed. "Did she hurt you, Dad?" He looked blank. Unsure, but when I handed him Mom's journal, something flickered. "Your mother hated red roses," he whispered. "Stephanie always kept red roses in the house." It wasn't proof, but it cracked something open. Stephanie filed a restraining order against me. She claimed I was violent, unstable, and manipulating Dennis. The court date loomed. Tara helped gather records, her visits, police reports, and her own statement. We included texts, Stephanie's drunk rants, laughing at Dad's confusion. The judge scanned the file. "If this is accurate," he said, "she's in serious violation." My heart pounded. We had the truth, but would the court believe it before it was too late? The judge ruled in my favor temporarily. Stephanie was barred from the house pending investigation. I returned to gather Dad's belongings and found hidden mail letters from Mom to me. Unopened, a sheet hidden them. One line read, "If something happens to me, protect him." My knees buckled. Dad cried when I read them aloud. "I thought she was helping," he whispered. We both knew better now. The battle shifted. Truth had momentum now. Stephanie hired a lawyer, one who specialized in elder law. She fought hard, claimed I was exploiting Dad emotionally. Her lawyer demanded visitation and access. We countered with medical reports, the forged will, and Judge Morale's statement. But still, they painted me as an opportunist. "She's grieving," they said. Unstable. For a second, I feared they'd win. Until Tara stood up in court, handed over voicemail recording Stephanie's voice, mocking Dad's forgetfulness. The courtroom shifted. Stephanie's lawyer withdrew after the recording surfaced. She screamed in the hallway. "This isn't over." Security stood between us. I didn't flinch. I had court orders, evidence, and finally my father's trust again. He said, "I shouldn't have seen it." I replied, "She's good at hiding." He held my hand for the first time in months. That night, I placed Mom's journal on the mantel. It felt like reclaiming not just justice but home. Stephanie returned once more, broke, furious, filing for spousal support. "You made him turn on me," she snarled at the hearing. But Dad's new attorney played a final card, financial records showing Stephanie had drained accounts, forged withdrawals. The judge denied her claim, citing fraudulent behavior. She gasped, slamming the table. As officers escorted her out, Dad leaned toward me. "She's gone, Riley." My shoulders dropped. For the first time, I believed him. Days later, we found a thumb drive in Stephanie's drawer, hidden beneath perfume bottles. It held videos. One showed her mocking Dad, another deleting emails labeled urgent medical. I turned them into the investigator. She was documenting her abuse. The detective said it made the case airtight. I showed Dad. His face crumpled. She laughed at me. I nodded. "But she can't anymore?" That was the final nail. No more doubts, just facts. Word spread in the community. Neighbors who once smiled at Stephanie stopped replying to her messages. She posted online, blaming me, calling me manipulative. But I shared court documents. Redacted but clear. The silence after was deafening. Tara called. "People see it now." Even Dad's skeptical brother apologized. "I should have trusted you," he said. For the first time, the shame wasn't mine to carry. My mother's voice echoed, "Protect him," and I did. Stephanie was charged with elder abuse, document tampering, and obstruction. The DA offered a plea deal. She refused, yelling about conspiracies. At the arraignment, she was remanded without bail after threatening a witness. Dad watched silently when we got home. He placed a framed photo of Mom back on the mantel. "She was always right," he said softly. I nodded, feeling peace for the first time since her funeral. Justice wasn't abstract anymore. At trial, witnesses spoke, Tara, neighbors, even the home nurse who quit after one visit. Each story painted Stephanie clearly: manipulative, cruel, calculating. When the jury returned, their faces were stone. Guilty, on all counts. Stephanie didn't flinch, but I saw her eyes scan the room. No one stood for her. Dad squeezed my hand. "Let's go home," he said. "Not the house, not the past, home together." That word meant something again. Media outlets picked up the story. Stepmother convicted of elder abuse in shocking family drama. My inbox overflowed messages from strangers, women who'd lived through similar betrayal. "You gave me courage," one wrote. I replied to everyone. Tara started a local support group. I spoke at the first meeting, voice trembling. "You're not crazy. You are not alone." Heads nodded. Some cried. Healing didn't start with court. It started with being heard. Dad started therapy. At first, he was resistant. "I'm fine," he said. But during one session, he admitted, "I stopped seeing myself when she came around." The counselor looked at me, and now Dad smiled weakly. "I'm trying." We went to the park that weekend. He watched kids playing, then whispered, "I miss your mom every day." I placed my hand on his. "Me too." This was the slow repair, brick by brick. One night, I opened a sealed envelope from Mom. Stephanie had missed this one. Inside was a single page: "You're stronger than you think, if you ever doubt it. Remember who raised you." I cried, silent, heaving sobs. Dad found me. Read the note. He didn't speak, it just hugged me. We stayed like that for minutes. Mom was gone, but her words remained. Her strength didn't vanish. It passed on to me, with the case closed. I renovated the house. I painted over Stephanie's dark tones, brought back Mom's favorite pastels. Tara helped me rehang the mural Mom once painted. Dad watched silently, then added a stroke of color. "I was afraid to touch it," he said. I smiled. "It's yours too." Every wall, every brushstroke felt like reclaiming breath. This house, once poisoned, pulsed with memory and finally with love again. On Mom's birthday, Dad and I lit a candle and placed it by her photo. "To the one who saw everything," I whispered, he added, "and never gave up on us." We sat in silence, the house calm. No more shouting, no more lies, just quiet gratitude. I looked around. The battle had ended, not with fire, but with steady hands rebuilding what mattered. And in that stillness, we finally found peace. Some nights, I still hear Stephanie's voice in my head, twisting truths, but now I answer back. I walk past the attic, once her lair, and feel no fear. I kept Mom's journals, now boxed neatly with a ribbon. They're not evidence anymore, they're memory. Dad cooks again. Laughs again when he smiles at old photos. It doesn't hurt, it heals. I don't flinch at the sound of the phone. I don't brace for lies. I breathe. That's the difference now. I'm free. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant remembering clearly without shame. Stephanie tried to erase my mother. Instead, she made her more real to me. I hold on to the phrase Mom wrote, "You're stronger than you think." I've repeated it to others at support meetings, in messages to strangers, in courtrooms. Strength doesn't always look like fists. Sometimes it's showing up. Sometimes it's speaking calmly while the world spins, and sometimes it's just standing still refusing to be erased. Stephanie was sentenced to 3 years no parole in court. She offered no apology, but I didn't need one. Closure wasn't in her words. It was in the silence after the verdict. Tara held my hand. Dad stood taller than I'd seen in years. Reporters asked for a statement. I said, "This isn't just about one woman. It's about believing your gut and protecting those you love." That day, I walked out not just vindicated but whole. We opened a scholarship in Mom's name for daughters protecting fathers, for caretakers unheard. Dad funded the first year. "Your mother would love this," he said. I nodded, tears warm but no longer bitter. Each application reminded me we're not alone. Pain isolates. That truth connects. Stephanie faded from headlines, from memory. But Mom, her legacy grows. In courtrooms, in homes, in voices once silenced now warring. I look at the photo on our mantle. We did it, Mom. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe to check out more stories on my channel.